In order to explain how template variants are handled with the new interface, I need to just show you what I've done to my model first. So I've taken the standard YMAX DSL model and I've basically done what one of the training exercises does, which is to stick all of the elements into a template, just because it's the easiest way to avoid any silly complications. And my template is called site. Zoom in a bit so you can see it more clearly. My template is called site, and I've got some variants called site 1, site 2, site 3, all the way up to site 10. And if you think about first of all, you think about what that means is that my model is now going to have, for every element you can see here, there will be actually a replica of that element for each of the different sites. So there will be a DSL access for site 1, DSL access for site 2, right through to site 10, and there'll be a DSL shelf for each of those 10 sites, and there'll be everything else for each of those sites. So lots and lots of elements. I could do the replicate command to show you, but you've seen it before. So if I switch over to the results program, and if you recall how this looks in 7.4, in 7.4, when you look at the list of elements to draw in a replicated model, for each element you have that is in a template, you won't just have the original element, you will have, so for DSL access, you would have DSL access /site 1, /site 2, /site 3, so you'd have 10 of those. And then for DSL shelf, you'd have DSL shelf /site 1, /site 2, all the way down to site 10. And then for DSL chassis, you'd have the same thing. So if you'd selected them, there'd be a mess here. And in the original list, if you hadn't filtered it, and even if you had filtered it, there would be a horrible mess here, because it would just be loads, it would essentially be 2 dimensions of information presented in one big mess. So we've done the obvious thing, which is that basically we've taken the variance away from the main element thing, because it is still basically DSL access, it's basically the DSL shelf, and the independent choice is which sites do you want to see those results for. And on the whole, our view is that it's very likely that if you want to see multiple elements and multiple sites, you'll want all the combinations, and if you don't, by far the easiest way to get that result is to select the complete set and then just select to remove anything you don't want from the resultant graph. So suppose we want to do DSL access, DSL shelf and DSL chassis, but for only certain variants. So what we do is we select the elements first here, and then we go to the variants tab. And in the variants tab, what you'll see is that for any element that was selected in the elements tab that is replicated, which in this case is all of them, what you'll see in the variants tab is one item for each of the separate sites. So here we have site 1 through site 10, together with an all site variance element, which basically would mean give me the total over all sites, which in 7.4 is shown as the original element with a star, and basically it's the result for the collection of all of the representatives of, let's say, DSL access in each of the sites. So it's the aggregate of DSL access /site 1 plus /site 2 all the way through DSL access /site 10. So if I've picked those 3 elements in the elements tab, and then in the variants tab, if I, let's say, just pick site 1 and site 2, and then we'll select those, and that's fine. I wasn't expecting to have all site variants selected. I don't know, I don't think I did. Let's remove that. Oh, I can't remove it. Okay, that's a bug. It's not supposed to be there because you're supposed to get it by default if it's not selected, and otherwise you're supposed to select it explicitly. So a little bit to sort out with logic there. So what you'll get with these 3 things here and these 3 things here is you'll actually get 9 lines, because what you'll get is you'll have DSL access oh, it's gone now, that's interesting, /site 1 and /site 2, and then you'll get DSL shelf /site 1 and /site 2, and you'll get DSL chassis /site 1 and site 2. So it's actually the 6 I originally expected. And obviously that's a much more elegant way of selecting the things, and it's also much easier to see concisely what you've selected and what you're going to get. So in general, the idea is that if you want to do particular combinations, then what you get is the combination of the selected elements and the selected variants. If you haven't, okay, back here, I can't get rid of them now. If you don't select any variants, then by default what you'll get is just the all site variant. So if I don't select anything here, you'll get the results as if there was no replication. So you would just get the result called DSL access, meaning the sum over all sites. And so, as I say, it's not working correctly. What you have to imagine is, I've pushed these two back over to the left. They're not here, so it's as if I'd started from the beginning. There was nothing selected here. Then the intention is that with nothing selected here, it would assume that what you wanted to see was just the all site variance representative for each element. Conversely, you might have made such a selection, and it might be a complicated selection. It might be sites 1, 2, 7 and 10, and you might not want to lose that selection, so you could have painstakingly set it up to be like this. And you might temporarily then want to draw some total results only, but not lose this selection. And so we've added a convenient thing here called Temporarily Disregard Selection, and if you check that box, then it will leave this here, but it will then behave as if you had selected nothing, i.e. if you have selected nothing or you check this to ignore this bit, it will behave as if you had selected only this. And that would mean that you would get one line for each of the original elements, and it would be the total for DSL access, the total for DSL shelf, and the total for DSLAM chassis. Now, when I said that what you see if you have anything that's going to be replicated, what you see here is the individual variant names plus the all item. That's not quite correct. Technically, you might have multiple templates in the model, and so if you have a selection of elements here, then more precisely the choices here will be the variants and the corresponding all item for each template that is represented. So this model only has one, so it's simple, but you could imagine the model might have multiple templates, and if you pick some elements from the first template and some elements from the second template, then you would have one set of variants and all for the first template, and the second set of variants and all for the other template. So it might be sites 1 down to site 10 plus all sites, and then if there was another thing like, I don't know, regions, then you'd have region 1 through region whatever plus all regions as well, and these ones would only apply to the things, to the elements in the site template, and the other ones would only apply to the elements that were in the regional template. And the other detail is that for elements that aren't replicated, they can still be drawn, and basically for elements that aren't replicated, they simply ignore this tab altogether, and you'll simply get the original element because that's all it can do. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we try to keep this dialog simple if it can be, so the variants tab itself will not be displayed if there are no templates in the model. It's also not displayed if you temporarily turn replication off, as you can in the scenarios and sensitivities dialog in the editor. Not that that's something you do very often. So basically, you'll only see this if you've actually got some templates in your model and you need to think about them. Otherwise, it just won't appear. And finally, again, just as in the other cases, there is again this separate graphs thing, so you can choose whether independently between the elements and the sites whether you want the elements to be on separate graphs or not, and the sites to be on separate graphs or not. And just like the other ones, it will always be unchecked by default, so the default will be that you would get your elements and sites all together on one graph, and then we leave it to you to decide whether you actually want to explode this into multiple charts, and whether you want it to be, you know, one element, multiple sites on one graph, or whether you want it to be one site and multiple elements on the one graph, or whatever. The sky is the limit. And that's all I want to say about templates, and this will be an interesting precursor for the scenario selection dialog, which has a similar but actually more complicated still interface metaphor, which I need to explain in the next video.